Hey guys, welcome back. In this video we're going to use Adobe Illustrator to do some editing of your laser cut box that you created in the previous step using makercase.com. I'm going to start by making a custom size, and I'm going to start by labeling the file with my names. This will help us later on figure out whose file belongs to whom. So just make sure your name's in the file name somehow. We're going to use inches just like we were using in the previous tutorial, and for this, like I mentioned before, one of the constraints is the box parts have to fit on a piece of plywood that are 11.75 or 11 3/4 by 11.75 inches. The other thing we want to make sure is that we're in RGB color mode. Alright, when all of that's set, we're going to create our file. And let's see, is it working? Yep, a little bit slow. So we can see I'm going to pinch out. We have our square here that measures almost 12 inches by almost 12 inches. And what we're going to do is find that file that we created in makercase.com. We're going to place it on here. We're going to do some editing so it fits on there. So I'm going to start over on the left by selecting the import option. I'm going to choose Files, and then I'm going to look for my box. Now I've done this a number of times to experiment through this to figure out which one, and so if you do this a number of times and you're trying to tweak it, you're like, which one is it? Because you see I have box 1 or box 2, 3, 4. Well, I know I just did this today at 1:12 p.m., which is box 5 for me, so sometimes you have to look at the time and the date. This is the one I want. Alright, so notice a couple of things. MakerCase grouped all this together, and it's like long rectangle, and we want it to fit into that square. I'm sure this will fit because I've done this before. You might run into some problems fitting it in there. You might need to redo some of your design and go back a step, and I had to do that too, but this should go the way that I planned here. Alright, so the first thing is, notice that when I try to select this, it's all grouped together. Well, when you have it selected, there's an option down at the bottom next to the lock that is a group and an ungroup button, and I'm going to press that, and I'm going to check, is it ungrouped? Nope, it's still grouped. It must be grouped a couple of times. I pressed it again, and now you'll notice there's not a slash through that button. Let me click off of it and click on one of these. Alright, there we have it. I can select one of these at a time, and the reason that's important is I'm going to arrange this so all of my parts fit onto the square here. I'm going to move a couple of these out of the way. Be very careful that you are moving it and that you're not changing the size. Let me show you, like if you are trying to move this and you're like, oh, too big, then very important, undo. Because if it's the wrong size, your box won't fit together later. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and move these around until they fit onto the square, making sure they're not touching or overlapping. I think I can get them all in here. I might have to go back and tighten those up a little bit. And these guys here, I'm going to zoom in so it's a little bit easier to select these. Notice this isn't going to fit in here. Some of it goes off the edge of the board. So I'm going to need to rotate these parts by choosing this control handle and turning it. Now if you hold down this control option, it lets you snap every 90 degrees, or maybe it's every 45. Well, let me try it and find out. Let's see, rotating, yep. Every 45 degrees it lets you snap so that everything lines up right. And now that's going to fit in there. And I'm just going to move this one a little bit closer. So I do have some extra space here in this design to work with. I'm going to go back and try to squeeze these a little bit closer together so that I know for sure it's going to fit on to the board. What do I mean fit onto the board? Well, let's take a look at that again. I know I showed this in the last video. Your parts will be laser cut out of a piece of wood that's almost 12 by 12. It's a little bit less than that. So you can see that picture there. And you can see this last step of how it's laser graving those parts, and then those are the 6 parts that make up your box. So That square that we're talking about is the square that I'm fitting all these parts on right now. And this is the exact box that's in the video, so you can kind of see how it turned out in the laser engraver. Alright, so now I got to make sure they're not touching, but they can be very close to each other. And if I zoom in here, I can see it's going to fit on the whole piece of wood. Alright, once you have it arranged like that, you can go ahead and do the next step, which is changing the line weight. So if you recall back to our other laser engraving cutting projects, the laser engraver needs to have very specific information about what lines to cut and what lines to engrave. And we want to cut all of these lines. You'll have the option to engrave later on, but we're going to leave that for now. Alright, so with everything selected, I'm going to go over to my Properties tab, and first I'm going to check the stroke, or the stroke weight. The color should be RGB red, which the hex code is this FF0000. But just to be sure, I can switch over to RGB sliders, and I see that it's at red 255, green and blue are 0 and 0. I'm not going to touch that because I don't want to accidentally move that by accident. Alright, so I'm going to turn that color off. I'm going to take my finger, scroll down to the stroke weight, sometimes called the line weight, and I'm going to change that to 0.001 inches. Now if you're in points, you can change it to 0.072 points. It's the same amount. Either one of those works. So either 0.001 inches or 0.72 points. But after you're done, it should look very, very light and thin. So you can barely see that. The laser engraver computer is going to interpret that data as cut data, and it's going to cut out each one of those parts. Alright, so now that that's finalized, we have all of our parts. They fit inside of our square. The stroke is set to RGB red, and the stroke weight is set to 0.001 inches or 0.072 points. Alright, so now I'm going to export. So up at the top right, I'm going to hit that share button, and I'm going to choose publish and export. And for this, we're going to choose the top one, which is AI. We're going to end up uploading this to Google Drive, but for now I'm just going to choose Save to Files near the bottom, and it'll ask us, where do you want to save it? As you want to remember this, I'm going to save it. I like to save stuff in downloads. You could save it wherever else you have, but downloads is a good place to look for stuff. And I'm going to click Save, and now it's saved and exported to that place on my iPad. And you're going to need to remember that for the next step, which will be in the next video.